That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, so we have a number of top wide receivers that are currently on bye. We have a couple of players on COVID. We got a lot to be talking about with these wide receiver rankings for week 9. We're going to go through, we're going to make this a tier list so it's really easy to follow along. Now, of course, before we dive into these rankings, you know, we have to give away some Fantasy Flock Network hats. Just shipped about 30 of these bad boys out for the last week set of winners. But our first winner for this video is going to be coming out from Matt, and our second one will be Duncan. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. And of course, every time you go down there, drop that like, leave a comment. If you're subscribed to the channel, you get entered in to win a Fantasy Flock Network hat. We give away multiple Flock Network hats every single video for completely free. Also, if you want to just go out there and pay for your hat, if you want to join the Flock community, you want an in-depth podcast breaking down your fantasy team, you want our rest of season rankings updated every single week, you want our dynasty rankings updated every single week, and at the same time, get into a dynasty league with us this offseason. Of course, all of that can be found over there on Patreon. You can find the link down there in the description of the video, and also down in the description of the video, you can find a link to join Underdog Fantasy, where, I mean, that is the spot where you can make all your player prop bets. You can get into some more fantasy drafts with us this season on Underdog Fantasy. When you make the minimum of a $10 deposit with promo code FLOCK, they're going to match every dollar you deposit with that first one, all the way up to $100. Make sure you use promo code FLOCK and go through the link in the description of the video. Yeah, and Thomas, can you please show some of those player props as we discuss these wide receivers through this list? That way people have a decent idea of what they can find over there on Underdog Fantasy. And of course, making that deposit with promo code FLOCK supports this channel even more than Patreon does, to be completely honest. But yeah, let's go through. Let's talk about some of these wide receivers. Let's start it off in tier 1. To nobody's surprise, I mean, we don't even have to talk about this in depth. We're going to go over to Cooper Kupp. And just to kind of give some insight into some context about Cooper Kupp's utter dominance so far this season, this is a wide receiver that this past week, he had 9 targets, 7 receptions, 115 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown against the Houston Texans. And this was a bad week from Cooper Kupp standards. This lowered his points per game. So yes, let me repeat that. He had over 100 receiving yards. He had 7 receptions and a receiving touchdown. Yet that week lowered his points per game average so far on the season. This is clearly the wide receiver 1 in fantasy. It was laughable that I continue to rank Devonta Adams as our wide receiver 1 in our rest of season rankings all the way up until like week 5 over there on Patreon. I apologize for that. Clearly it's Cooper Kupp. This matchup against the Titans, honestly, you kind of like it with the Derrick Henry injury. Maybe thinking that the Tennessee Titans decide to push the pace of play and they can't really just run the clock out with Henry. And that would obviously be fantastic because the more possessions for the Los Angeles Rams, the more opportunities we get for Cooper Kupp to rack up those receptions and rack up those yards. Now, in the same tier with Cooper Kupp, we are going to have Tyreek Hill going against the Green Bay Packers. Now, I know a lot of people want to panic on this Kansas City Chiefs offense for good reason. The Chiefs have looked nothing like they did in 2018, 2019, or in 2020. I mean, just knowing that they are turning the ball over at a rate that's pretty much double what we have historically seen from this Kansas City Chiefs offense, I will say there's definitely reason to have concern with some of these secondary options. However, Tyreek Hill at the same time, I mean, this has been worst case scenario for the Kansas City Chiefs. Tyreek Hill has still been dominant in fantasy. This is a player that right now is the wide receiver 3 on a points per game basis. I mean, one of those weeks that he actually had back in week 2, he was in and out of the game with a shoulder injury, and he only scored 5 points in that contest. If you were to take that game out of the sample, knowing that he was injured against the Ravens, and we just look at every other week, this is 37 points, 12 points, 47 points, 15, 22, 13, 27. Clearly, you're going to be a little bit more volatile when you're rolling with Tyreek Hill compared to some other options in fantasy, but the ceiling performances are going to be so much higher than pretty much any other wide receiver in the entire NFL. I'm pretty sure that 47 points that Tyreek Hill scored in week 4 is the highest mark on the season. So yeah, Tyreek Hill is still going to be in that top tier, like the matchup against the Green Bay Packers overall. Now let's go down to our second tier of wide receivers. Usually we would have Devonta Adams up there, but we can't have him just because Aaron Rodgers going on the COVID list. We're actually going to lead off with a wide receiver that I will say maybe he goes down these rankings if we get confirmation on Kyler Murray, but we will have Deebo Samuel at wide receiver 3 this week. Now with Deebo Samuel, this is another wide receiver that I have to kind of sit here and take my L on. I had Robert Woods ranked higher than Cooper Kupp coming into the season. I had Brandon Ayuk ranked higher than Deebo Samuel. Clearly embarrassing at this point because Deebo Samuel, he hasn't just been doing this with those long balls that I know a lot of this production has been driven through the fact that he has multiple touchdowns over 50 receiving yards. And while Deebo Samuel definitely is a dynamic player with a ton of ability with yards after the catch, just having a breakaway catch rate like that is not sustainable in the long term. But if we take a step back and still view just this overall season from Samuel, not only is he getting there based on those long balls, but at the same time, he's getting there with volume. This is a wide receiver that's had over 10 targets per game this season. Now, I will say it's a tough matchup against the Arizona Cardinals, and this ranking right here is assuming that Kyler Murray does play, because with the assumption that Kyler Murray does play, we're going to imagine that this 49ers offense, they can't be as run heavy as what they usually prefer. They are going to have to look to pass the ball at a little bit of a higher clip. Now, if Kyler Murray sits, I think we actually have to drop Deebo Samuel to the bottom of this tier, knowing that it would be a great Elijah Mitchell game with how the 49ers would be able to establish the run instead. But right now, we're going to be operating under the assumption that Hopkins and Murray are going to be good to go. And for that reason, I think that this 49ers offense may have to skew the pass rate a little bit higher than most weeks. And I think that's going to be a great spot for Deebo Samuel, who's currently the wide receiver 2 on the season, to just get a ton of targets. Now, our wide receiver 4 this week will be someone that was our buy low number 1 wide receiver of the week. We're going to be going over to Justin Jefferson. Now, I get it with Justin Jefferson coming off a very disappointing performance against the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, so far, this is a wide receiver that's the wide receiver 17 in points per game. And we have yet to have that one massive blow-up week from Justin Jefferson. The best week that we have under our belt is actually going to be 26 points in week 3 against the Seattle Seahawks. However, with Justin Jefferson, he has been one of the most consistent wide receivers in the entire NFL so far this season. I think that we haven't even come close to seeing his ceiling, and I understand that week 8 performance is skewing a lot of the numbers that we have on a per game basis for Jefferson, knowing that he was just limping around on the sideline. I think that we can honestly just take that game against the Dallas Cowboys, throw it out the window for Justin Jefferson. Remember, I had Jefferson ranked significantly lower than this last week, given the matchup that he had against Dallas, given that I really didn't love that spot. If we're just going to be looking at the first 6 weeks this season where Justin Jefferson was healthy, he was the wide receiver 5 overall. I think that elite production is still there. It's not a perfect matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, but we would naturally assume that since the Ravens are going to be favored in this game, that you could see this Minnesota Vikings offense being forced to throw the ball a little bit more. I think it's a clean bounce back spot for Justin Jefferson. He's one of the few wide receivers that has no question marks centering around him, so we will have him currently at wide receiver 4. Now, our wide receiver 5, y'all know usually he's in the top tier for us. Usually he's undoubtedly in the top tier. Having to drop him down here because obviously Aaron Rodgers on the COVID list. Devonta Adams. Now with Devonta Adams, one of my most drafted players in fantasy, because we are identifying a lot of those round 1 running backs as risky for one reason or another. And yeah, we were drafting Adams over Derrick Henry. Thank God we got lucky into just getting Adams and avoiding that injury. But nonetheless, we're looking at Devonta Adams now, and you're saying, okay, well, his historical rates are really hard to kind of view and know exactly what we can expect, given that his entire career has been played with Rodgers. Rodgers has missed very little time. We don't have many games to look at since Devonta Adams has turned into a 30% team target share level player without Aaron Rodgers in. Now, I will say with Jordan Love, I've heard some people coming out acting as if Jordan Love is some rush first quarterback, acting as if Jordan Love is Trey Lance, Taysom Hill. I have no idea where that's coming from. Jordan Love is a prototypical pocket passing option that I think could be fine for Adams. We really don't know how he's going to distribute targets. I mean, this week, it's a great matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. So it's a tough spot just because, I mean, it's a great matchup. Adams is, in my opinion, just the wide receiver 2 in that same tier along with Tyreek Hill. But the problem is with no Rodgers, you would naturally assume that this offense has less trips to the red zone. I mean, it's less efficient overall. So we will have Adams at 5. Usually he'll be at 2. But yeah, we were definitely going to have to drop him down a tier, drop him down a couple of rankings. Now, our last wide receiver in this tier is actually going to be Stefon Diggs. Now, with Stefon Diggs, I mean, this is an option that has been very disappointing so far this season. If you're looking at his points per game, I mean, there are a lot of wide receivers I'm ranking behind Stefon Diggs this week that have drastically outproduced Stefon Diggs up to date this season. Now, with Diggs, at some point, we are going to have to look at him and say, well, I mean, what are we doing here? This is a wide receiver that, yes, the volume may be there. Yes, the Buffalo Bills are number one in NFL, according to Las Vegas, with their implied team total almost every single week. Clearly, Vegas is operating under the assumption that this Buffalo Bills offense is the best offense in the NFL. Stefon Diggs has been able to see consistently 10-plus targets in this offense. He has had a very, very high floor, similar to what we've had with Justin Jefferson so far this season. I mean, Stefon Diggs, his lowest week was 8.9 points against the Kansas City Chiefs. Outside of that, he has had double-digit points every week this season. The issue is he just isn't getting any of those massive 38-point blow-up weeks that we're getting from the Tyreek Hill, the Cooper Kupp, the Devonta Adams of the world. Now with Diggs, this is a wide receiver that we know the talent profile is there. We know what we saw in 2020. We can see those efficiency spikes given the environment of this offense. So we'll have Diggs in a nice matchup against Jacksonville at 6. Even though, honestly, I'm not that confident with it because the production hasn't been nearly to this range so far this season. Now let's go over to our next wide receiver, which I know a lot of people will want to have above Justin Jefferson, above Deebo Samuel, above Stefon Diggs. And let's go over to Jamar Chase. And now with Jamar Chase, I am completely fine with anybody coming out and making the argument that Chase is one of the most talented wide receivers in the NFL already. You want to make the argument that Chase is a better NFL talent than Deebo Samuel. You want to make that argument that he's a better NFL talent than Jefferson or Stefon Diggs. I'm completely fine with that. However, what we have found so far in Cincinnati since the T. Higgins return is that target share for Jamar Chase to take that drastic dip down. You have consistently been getting Higgins. I mean, over the past month since Higgins has returned from that shoulder injury, Higgins has actually had just as many, if not more targets than Jamar Chase during that time period. Now, Chase is the significantly better wide receiver. And of course, I'm never going to be able to come out and try to put the same words as T. Higgins and Jamar Chase in the same tier ever again. I mean, those days are long gone, given the talent profile that Chase has and how he's been historically, I mean, dominant. This is a player with 60 targets only, yet he's had 786 receiving yards. That yards per target number for this kind of volume is unheard of, especially from a rookie wide receiver only 21 years old. Now, it's a tough matchup against the Cleveland Browns. And to go along with this, I mean, you're getting the usage for Higgins. You're getting the usage for Tyler Boyd. So with Jamar Chase, it's a bet on efficiency rather than a bet on volume, which I'm never a fan of making. But if you are going to do it, you have to do it with an elite level talent, which Jamar Chase clearly is. Not in love with the matchup, though. So we will have him down here at wide receiver 7 below those other players. I know a lot of people are going to want to have him over. Now, our next wide receiver is someone that was our number one buy low player for weeks on end. I mean, we are saying this every single video, every single live stream earlier this season. A.J. Brown. Now, I know A.J. Brown, we kind of have to put that little caveat out there saying that I have A.J. Brown in a ton of leagues. Everybody in the flock, I know people watching this video are probably losing their minds screaming, A.J. Brown, A.J. Brown, A.J. Brown, where is he? Because everybody here has him on their rosters, and everybody's probably going to be a little pissed off that I have him ranked down here at wide receiver 8 after a week where he just blew up 11 targets, 10 receptions, 155 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown. I mean, the week before that, he had over 130 receiving yards, the receiving touchdown as well. I mean, we've covered this extensively with A.J. Brown. He has been at the very top of his team in targets every week that he has been fully healthy. Now, I know a lot of people are going to want to say, Mason, I mean, no Derrick Henry. This is going to help A.J. Brown. He's going to be getting even more targets in this offense. I mean, it's going to be a pass-happy offense at this point, and A.J. Brown is going to be seeing the benefits for that. Now, I want to just say something that's completely honest here. I have no idea how the Derrick Henry absence is going to affect this passing game for the Tennessee Titans. Because in theory, yes, they're going to see more passing attempts per game. Yes, in theory, once they get to the red zone, that touchdown will be less likely to go to Adrian Peterson or Jeremy McNichols, and it'll be more likely to go to one of the wide receivers in this offense. But this offense, compared to what we have historically had with pretty much any other NFL team, is almost impossible to draw any comparison to. because usually when you see that starting running back go down and that NFL team has to cue a little bit more pass happy, I agree with you. That helps the wide receivers, especially if that running back's not seeing a lot of targets out of the backfield. But this offense in particular with Tennessee is so damn hard to say that with, based on the fact that this Tennessee Titans offense has been built on the run and everything has been funneled through the play action pass. And that's why they've been one of the most efficient offenses in the entire NFL since you add that Derrick Henry breakout and Ryan Tannehill took over as the starting quarterback here. Also, it's a tough matchup for A.J. Brown. So I know this is kind of lower than where we've had him previously. I know with A.J. Brown, we've talked about him as a top 5 wide receiver before. I'm just hesitant to go out there and say all of a sudden he is a top 3 wide receiver rest of season with no Derrick Henry in this offense. Also against the Rams, obviously it's a very tough matchup defensively. So we're going to have A.J. Brown down at wide receiver 8. We're going to be a little more conservative. Now, we got to go faster through this. Dear God. Let's go with CeeDee Lamb as our next wide receiver. With Lamb here, we definitely need to monitor if Michael Gallup's going to come back. I think if Gallup does come back, it's going to slide CeeDee Lamb into the slot a little bit more. I think Gallup's presence hurts Dalton Schultz, and it will have a slight ding to the other wide receivers in this offense. Nothing against Lamb, nothing against Amari. They are elite level talents. Love those wide receivers, but I really want to be pointing out how damn good Michael Gallup is. Gallup had more targets per game than Amari in 2019 as a second-year player. He had more receiving yards per game. It wasn't a small sample at all. He had 14 games played. So definitely the presence of Michael Gallup, I think, will be lowering the floor of these wide receivers, knowing that it will make them a little bit more volatile week to week. Now, our last wide receiver in this tier, it will be DeAndre Hopkins going up against the 49ers. Now with Hopkins, extremely hard to rank him right now. I think that this ranking can definitely go up and down because Hopkins is a player that is not fully healthy himself. Obviously, I mean, you do not have Kyler Murray healthy. Hopkins missed practice on Wednesday. So yeah, I mean, those 49ers rankings, those Arizona Cardinals rankings, they're going to be drastically shifted throughout the week. But keep in mind, I live stream every single night. Literally, we've live streamed over 100 nights in a row. If you haven't come out to the live streams, just make sure you're subscribed. But more importantly, hit that bell next to the subscribe button if you really want to be able to make it out to the streams. We will be giving constant updates with players like DeAndre Hopkins. Now let's go down a tier and let me pay some respect to someone that I have been unfairly harsh against over the past couple months. Let's talk about Deontay Johnson here. Now with Deontay Johnson, yes, it's true that in 2020, from a per target basis, he was one of the worst wide receivers in the NFL. Yes, it's true that with Deontay Johnson, this is a player that is at a higher risk for injury than a lot of other wide receivers in the NFL. But at the same time, it's true that Deontay Johnson has played 6 weeks this season, and he's had 63 targets through those 6 weeks, and you do not have Juju Smith-Schuster in this offense, so that just makes Deontay Johnson a prototypical target hog in Pittsburgh. They're not going to be able to give every single target to Najee Harris out of the backfield. Now, I will say with Deontay that it's a tough matchup against the Chicago Bears, but I mean, I think that we just have to kind of eat it. We have to say, you know what? Deontay is the man, regardless of what I wanted to see with Juju Smith-Schuster. Clearly, it isn't happening. So Deontay Johnson, going to be a top 12 wide receiver. We'll have him at wide receiver 11. Now, our next option, I mean, one of our buy low players over the past few weeks, still think that you can buy him at a discount. We're going to go over to Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen had the strong performance this past week against the New England Patriots. 11 targets, 6 receptions, 77 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown. We talked about that touchdown rate 100% going up for Keenan. Now this is a player that's had 69 targets through 7 games. So he's averaging essentially 10 targets a contest, going up against a very soft Philadelphia Eagles defense. Hopefully this game's a little higher scoring than a lot of people want to assume. So we will have Keenan Allen at 12. Now, our next wide receiver, I mean, I think that we have all learned this lesson by now. DJ Moore. And with DJ Moore, you do not play the number 1 receiving threat against Bill Belichick and that defense. They are going to scheme against DJ Moore. Hopefully, we get Christian McCaffrey back in this game. That will lower the overall target volume that DJ Moore may have, but it's going to increase the efficiency of this offense. They'll be picking up more first downs. They'll have more trips to the red zone. Hopefully, we see Sam Darnold go back to the quarterback that he was at the beginning of the season. Not a great matchup at all for DJ Moore, so we will have him at wide receiver 13, even though he's had some very impressive games at the beginning of the year, specifically with Christian McCaffrey in the lineup. Really hard to know exactly what we can expect from Carolina at this point. Then Amari Cooper will be our last wide receiver in this tier at wide receiver 14. With Amari, yes, he was on our sell high list. Love me some Amari Cooper. We used to have his Raiders jersey in the background of the studio. I mean, he was one of the main reasons I fell in love with Dynasty Fantasy Football back in 2014, back in 2015. I mean, coming out of that 2015 NFL draft class, this was one of the best wide receiver prospects of all time. I'll always have a special place in my heart for Amari. But at the end of the day, I mean, you're going to be expecting that this is a unstable wide receiver. Yes, you've had 2 games where he's averaged 30 points in those 2 contests. He's also had 2 games this year where he's had 5 fantasy points. I mean, it's not a great matchup against Denver. At the same time, possibly getting Michael Gallup back, we'll have Amari Cooper as a high-end wide receiver too. Now let's go down one more tier. Let's go down to a Mike Williams, wide receiver 15, a clear buy low candidate. We've had a lot of people in the live streams screaming, Mason, should we be panicking with Mike Williams? Mason, what are we doing with Mike Williams? And yes, back-to-back weeks of horrendous performances. Now, I will say this past week against the Patriots, I don't want to be riding him in a complete excuse and saying that we need to completely ignore this game. Was a tough matchup against New England, but the game against Baltimore, that's a game that we can completely ignore. He didn't practice a single day leading up into that contest. He played like 30% of the snaps. Clearly, he was not a healthy player. And if you're going to be looking at a points per game mark so far this season, he is the wide receiver 15 in points per game based on the elite performances he was giving us at the beginning of the season. And if we were to remove that week 6 performance against the Ravens, he would actually jump up to being a low-end wide receiver 1. So yeah, with Mike Williams, I'm going to be taking the opportunity. We are going to be buying him low. We will have him at wide receiver 15. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be screaming that we forgot someone here. He has a great matchup. He is the wide receiver 20 on a points per game basis. We're going to go over to Michael Pittman with our next guy at wide receiver 16 against the New York Jets. I mean, this Indianapolis Colts offense. I mean, I will admit, as soon as you had Quentin Nelson getting carted off the field, knowing how impactful Quentin Nelson was for this overall offensive environment with the efficiency you should be seeing for Jonathan Taylor, for Michael Pittman, for Carson Wentz, I mean, I was ready to panic on Indianapolis. I mean, that Quentin Nelson injury, once he gets carted off and it's deemed that he has that high ankle sprain, an injury that you saw Michael Thomas have in 2019, an injury that led Jerry Jeudy to missing the first half of the season, I was like, oh my God, the Colts, they can be toast. It's not guaranteed, but there's a chance that without Quentin Nelson here, this offensive line goes to being an average unit. And if defenses can consistently get to Carson Wentz, it's going to be disgusting. Well, Quentin Nelson comes back way earlier than expected. And yeah, this past week, you actually get 15 targets for Michael Pittman, 2 receiving touchdowns, 10 receptions, 86 receiving yards at the same time. Clearly, Michael Pittman is just a goddamn boss. And this week against the Jets, next week against the Jags, going to be great spots for Michael Pittman. Now, wide receiver 17, an intriguing buy low candidate we listed last week, and then he comes out. Then he has a massive blow-up spot. I mean, yes, in garbage time, it is what it is. Brandon Cooks. With Brandon Cooks, he has 6 targets, 6 receptions, 83 receiving yards, and that receiving touchdown against the Los Angeles Rams. Why we were very excited about buying low on Brandon Cooks a few weeks ago after he had a couple single-digit performances is based on the fact that Tyrod Taylor will be coming back to this team. Tyrod Taylor will be improving the overall efficiency of this offense. Going up against the Miami Dolphins, it's also a very good matchup, and this is going to be one of the few games that Houston actually probably plays a competitive contest. And I mean, the spread in this game is currently less than a touchdown, which is never the case for these Houston games. So I think you have to get excited about playing Cooks this week. Now, wide receiver 18 will be Adam Thielen. Not loving the matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. I do think Justin Jefferson is going to take a significant step forward in this game. However, with Adam Thielen, this is back-to-back weeks. Keep in mind, like Adam Thielen was a player. I feel like we have crushed Adam Thielen so far this season. We said to sell high after he had his first 2-week span where he dropped 46 fantasy points during those 2 weeks. A lot of people were valuing Adam Thielen as a top 10 wide receiver. Then the following 3 weeks, I mean, Adam Thielen has some performances where he scores 7 points, 6 points. People are panicking. We're going, hell yeah, let's go buy low on Adam Thielen. What did we say so many times? That Adam Thielen is that touchdown-dependent wide receiver. When the touchdown is there, you're going to be loving life with Adam Thielen. When it's not, you're going to be hating yourself. So he comes out, scores a touchdown over the past 2 weeks. So far, he's had 6 touchdowns through 7 games this season. I mean, Adam Thielen's never changed who he is. This is just kind of the role that he'll play in this offense. This is what you should naturally assume. I mean, Adam Thielen against the Baltimore Ravens, it's what we've dealt with Adam Thielen from years. Not going to be having to say too much on this. Now, Hollywood Brown will be our next wide receiver. We're going to be dropping it a tier below, wide receiver 19. Now, with Hollywood, he does have a pretty decent matchup against the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I really want to be monitoring if Sammy Watkins plays in this game, because if Watkins plays, Hollywood Brown will have more target competition in this game than he has ever seen in his entire NFL career so far. He will have Bateman, Watkins, and Mark Andrews to deal with. So I think for that reason, we'd have to have Hollywood Brown ranked as a mid to low end wide receiver 2. But if Watkins does miss, I think you have to move Hollywood Brown up to the tier above. Now, our wide receiver 20, he's on our sell high video this list, going to be Robert Woods. Yes, one of our must-draft players coming into the season. I will just say we need to take our L with that, because if you're looking at the volume that Cooper Kupp is getting in this offense, it doesn't matter that, yeah, like we expected this Rams offense to be significantly better than they were previously. You just have this as a very disappointing wide receiver overall, where if we're going to be going through this past week, he drops 20 fantasy points against the Texans, but at the same time, he does that with 35 receiving yards. It's because he gets there with the receiving touchdown. It's because he gets the rushing touchdown at the same time. That's not something that we can project going forward. Now, it's a good matchup against the Tennessee Titans. He's playing in a great offense, so we will have him as a low-end wide receiver too, but Robert Woods clearly not the wide receiver that we thought he was going to be. Now, our next wide receiver, I mean, we're going to talk about a pairing of them. Wide receiver 21, wide receiver 22, drop them down a tier. We're going to have Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. Noah Sutton and Jeudy here, I actually think that we're going to be ranking them more aggressively than we would have otherwise, knowing that Noah Fant most likely misses this game. With Noah Fant missing this game, I think the projected target share goes up for both Sutton and Jeudy, because Albert O, while he is a great replacement for Noah Fant in his own right, he is not going to be able to see the same level of involvement in the receiving game that you would have from Noah Fant. So for that reason, you want to be giving the bump up to Sutton and Jeudy. The Denver Broncos offense definitely failed a week ago. Keep in mind, we've been saying to sell Noah Fant, sell Courtland Sutton for weeks now, knowing that you would be getting Jerry Jeudy back in. You would also be getting in Albert O off the IR. Now this week, I mean, I think it's a toss-up between Sutton or Jeudy. It's really up to you with how you rank them. Now, wide receiver 23, T. Higgins. It's going to happen one of these days with Higgins. Y'all know every single week, T. Higgins is a buy low candidate for us. Every single week, T. Higgins is a top 24 wide receiver. He's a young, talented option that is getting volume in his passing offense. If you're looking at a week ago, he gets stopped at the 2-yard line from getting that touchdown, from saving our fantasy days. He has 97 receiving yards, 4 receptions. If he would have just got 2 more yards, got into the end zone there, we'd have been looking at a 20-point game from T. Higgins. Sucks to see we didn't get it, though. Now, Cleveland, tough matchup, so we're going to have him at the bottom of these top 24 rankings, mainly because we have a lot of bye weeks this week. And our last wide receiver, Chase Claypool, also in a tough matchup. Claypool is going to be a buy low candidate for me as well, as we have previously discussed. As a wide receiver that is seeing a career high in his snap rate, given the injury that you have to Juju Smith-Schuster. We know that he is going to be a wide receiver that has a hard time drawing targets deep downfield from Ben Roethlisberger, just given the arm strength that you have from Big Ben at this point, and how his targets are just going closer to the line of scrimmage than what you would have with another quarterback in particular. But nonetheless, Claypool has the talent. Even if it's a tough matchup, you know that it's in the range of outcomes that he does see that blow up game. Now, of course, thank you so much for checking out this video. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. And of course, go down there, subscribe, drop that like, leave a comment to get entered in to win a Fantasy Flock Network hat. Of course, you can just go get your Fantasy Flock Network hat over there by joining the flock on Patreon if you would like. Get an in-depth podcast breaking down your fantasy team, get our rest of season rankings, get our dynasty rankings, get in a dynasty league with us, get in our group chat. And also, if you want to check out some of those player props, you want to get into a draft with us for the rest of the year, make sure you go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. With a $10 deposit, you get that matched all the way up to $100, depending on how much you deposit for your first time, of course. But use promo code FLOCK. Find the link in the live chat. Find the link in the description of the video. Also, of course, that supports it. And yeah, I think that's all I got for y'all. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I hope you have a great day.